Welcome back to Used to Sew, a podcast about sewing machines, sewing history, and sewing culture in the past and present. I am your producer and co-host, Aradia, daughter of your main host, T.R. Kelly, who is here today to talk to you about U.S. history. Starting with Betsy Ross and the American Revolutionary flag, then moving through the quilting traditions developed in response to the Underground Railroad and abolition, the pioneer era, the suffrage and prohibition movements, and Native American boarding schools, which means we do talk about some tough subjects, but it's all important and relevant to our motivations for making this podcast. This episode is a cluster of topics found while TR attempted to answer just one question, and is remarkably light on sewing machines specifically. We also talk about age-based assumptions of sewing interest, the overlap between sewing and carpentry, a quilt that wasn't finished for 30 years, and how the fur trade often exchanged fabric for fur. There are links in the show notes that you should absolutely check out for more reading, and also there's a masterful map of vintage sewing machine repair shops. TR introduced this episode as potentially coming out in July. That was perhaps a bit overenthusiastic, as it will actually come out a month before the 4th of July. But whatever, it's still summer in the sense that we're inside the brightest 2 months of the year, with the summer solstice coming up in 2 weeks from when this episode drops. The brightness is driving me to feel much more motivated than usual. It's been getting hard to pace myself. If you've been feeling a little extra energized, and are living in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously, make sure to take into account the extra sunlight we're being blasted with and take care of yourself.
Well, basically, it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere. It's early summer. You might be hearing it by midsummer. You might not even get around to listening to it till American Independence Day, 4th of July, 4 de Julio. The experiment called the United States of America is going to be 250 years old this year, if we make it that far. Okay, today's episode is about sewing and American history, which we touch on all the time, but I'm just going to say it right up front. We got some history here, and since it's American history, it's not pretty.
Nope. Gird your loins.
Yeah, we don't tell the school board authorized textbook versions of things here.
We do not get federal funding.
No, we do not. And we fully believe in free speech. And if anything that we say pisses you off, please write us and tell us. You know, we thrive on communication here. But don't tell your friends because we don't need any more subscribers. No, I went over to used to sew on YouTube today. Used to tube. I was like, we have more subscribers than a lot of my favorite channels. I'm like, no, I can't get bigger than my heroes. So anyway, keep us to yourself. Write us a letter. We do get them. We have some people that just write us a lot, and that's okay because, hey, we are the coolest sewing room in town, even though we're usually out of Velcro and fleece because we don't believe in Velcro and fleece. I was just thinking about the other day, just before we get into this serious stuff here, about when people find out, and you might get this right, when people say, you say you're into sewing or you do sewing or you have a sewing room. Oh, are you a quilter? Do you ever get that?
That has not happened to me yet. Everyone who asks me what I do with sewing, it's always about altering or making clothes.
Oh.
Usually it's about alterations. Vast majority of the time that people's follow-up question is about alterations.
I think that I'm running into some ageism here.
It's a generational divide. I don't know if it's ageism.
No, I think people see an old white lady with white hair and assume she's a quilter.
Oh, sure. Fair. Whereas, yeah, I'm the young, hip millennial who clearly alters their clothes because they have the wrong proportion of hip to leg length.
Or people might ask you about cosplay costumes or things like that because that's more of a millennial, like, it's okay to be a furry now. Can I sew this on my Sears, you know? But and my answer, it used to just kind of like, I didn't know what to say. But now this is for all you other white-haired ladies in fabric stores out there who might get the question, oh, are you a quilter? If you go to a family reunion, oh, I sew. Are you a quilter? Because everybody knows that stereotype, and if you're in the quilting, then you could even say, oh, you know the quilt police? My answer, I've made quilts, but I'm not a quilter. There is a difference. Quilter has a capital letter. Deep sideways rabbit hole. Quilter is also the name of a line of high-priced guitar amplifiers. I don't know why.
What the? What?
And they have a metal quilted design on the front. It's silly.
That makes no sense.
If anybody knows why, let me know. Was the guy, he's designing shit in his garage, and his wife says, I'll let you build that thing, but you got to call it.
All right. Someone find the lore.
So quilts, and with the demise of all the chain fabric stores and people are looking for places to buy fabric, and you've had this experience, you wind up in a quilt shop looking for garment parts, and there aren't any. There's no zippers. There's no buttons. There's no, no.
Correct.
Nothing that's not quilting. There's no tools that are, except rotary cutters and really expensive acrylic rulers and leather thimbles and miles of batiks and calicos and two-tones and reds and, all these things. So this is, as I was staring at some fabric and thinking creative thoughts, a quilt store is to a fabric store, a full-service fabric store, like a transmission shop is to an auto repair dealership, right?
Sure.
It's a niche. So we have this niche of what people think fabric stores. Oh, yeah, there's one in my town because they just see, sewing fabric stuff there. And they don't know that, wait, there's no denim, there's no fleece, there's no pocketing, there's no, buckram. All these things that you would find in a full-service fabric store are not in a quilt store. Bless their little hearts, because quilting is one sector of the fabric and textile marketing consumer thing that's actually growing. Why? Old white ladies. Not the only ones who quilt, but the most economically visible segment. I'm reading a book right now about experiences of women of color in the textile arts and how one African-American woman just quit even trying to go to quilt guilds because it was uncomfortable.
Wow.
I'm going to read that story later in a future episode. But American history. Let's get back to that because that's some other American history. Now, don't tune us out. This has got some fun stuff. Okay? Okay, last episode, I just want to say something here. Last episode, we talked about Skagit sewing machine salvage and service. And when I was looking up that business, I found, and I want to share this with you guys, and you've got to look at it in the show notes, a map of vintage sewing machine repair shops. I had thought about creating this myself. Somebody has already done it.
Yes, we love a fellow map nerd.
Our unofficial sponsor, Stagecoach Road, is on there, and Skagit's on there.
Yes!
And
yes!
The majority of these are in North America and Europe, but there are 3 in South America, 5 in Africa, a handful in Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia. So this is an amazing site, and we're going to put a link to it, to this specific thing. And there will be your vintage sewing machine repair, little old guys in their garage.
Wow, someone has made this resource.
Someone has done it. This is the same site that you found that had all the Singer decal patterns on it.
Oh,
this is an amazing
nerd
site.
Multimodal nerd. Oh,
so
that's fantastic.
I just wanted to share that with you guys. That I'm going to click on one. Oh, I can't even read that. It's in Italian, but they're everywhere. And get directions. It's all integrated with mapping and stuff. So, A, I'm so happy this exists. B, I'm so happy I don't have to do it.
Yeah, no, there's definitely like the dopamine of, ooh, I could make that. And then there's the relief of, I don't have to belly flop face plant on attempting to make that. Someone is already.
Let's just say I was writing it out in cursive with a big pen on a legal pad. So it's not going to work.
So happy to hear it's already been digitized.
So thank you to lrcrafts.it. I think that's Italy. lrcrafts.it. Vintage sewing machine repair services map. Beautiful resource. I think we need to not let this just fade away into our episode thing. We need to have a little thing of files or resources or something, because this is important stuff.
We should have a page on the website that is
our
a collection
resources.
of resources. Like we could have everything we've ever mentioned and then also like a special, top of the top thing that's extra important. We could work on the website a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. That's my fault.
It's our responsibility. You're the one who has to execute it, but we have to craft the content.
I know how to write HTML. That's kind of about where I stopped programming. But there's 234 locations on this map, and I'm sure we could figure out how to add more. There's none in Antarctica yet. You could be the first.
That seems like it'll be a long time coming. I mean, I'm sure that there is a sewing machine or 3 in Antarctica because they do have, need of that, but I doubt that there's need for a sewing machine repair shop. I think it's probably just the person brings their machine and it's fine.
I have so many. I'm reading through the list of these places, and so many of them are independent, by appointment only, vintage sewing machine parts. It's not big chain stores. This is the little guys in their garage. Here's one: modern home domestic sewing machines, how to use your machine lessons, sewing instructions, by appointment only, offers house calls, where they're at and their socials and stuff. This is just a tremendous resource for all of us. Yeah, well, back in the day, you just had to say, "Hey there, Bob, is your wife doing any sewing?"
Now we have the internet.
Where do you go buy? See, and this is the thing. Not only when people go, "I want to buy a used machine, where do I get it?" Well, unless you're brave, maybe you don't want to buy one. You want to buy something that somebody's going to stand behind it, right? I'll buy a vintage sewing machine, but from who? Look at that list of people I just told you about. Or once you've kind of gotten into it and you've collected a lot of carcasses and figured it out, and, people are leaving ones on your doorstep, and you're like, "Hey, I'm going to buy one of those O-Matics and see if I can change out that gear." Do it. But if you're just getting started to sew and you just want a vintage machine because you've been sold on the concept of fighting fast fashion, getting corporations out of your creative space, where do you go to get a vintage machine? The people on this list would be where I would start. And if, they all have phone numbers and emails, right? So if I drive to your shop, what am I going to see? So just give them a call. This just makes me so excited. I'm not on this list, and I'm glad, because I have a lot of good ideas and not a lot of follow through.
You've got enough word of mouth interest in your sewing machine repair skills going on.
Yeah, well, like I talked about in the last episode, I left that one customer hanging for 3 years. The shame. Okay, today I want to talk about American history again, always. Aradia, you even know the answer to this. Who is the United States' most famous seamstress?
Well, if we're going with quintessential symbols of American history and singular seamstresses who had singular roles in said important symbols, we're going to have to go with Betsy Ross, who sewed the American Revolutionary flag.
Ding, 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 ding. You're a winner on American history with sewing machines. However, Betsy Ross did not have a sewing machine. She died before they were invented. Let's go to the National Women's History Museum and talk about Betsy Ross, who lived from 1752 to 1836. So, the very, very beginning of the Industrial Revolution is when she passed on. Considered essential to the American Revolution, Betsy Ross is credited with sewing the first United States flag. A symbol of patriotism, Ross is often celebrated as the woman who helped George Washington finish the design. Although there is no historical evidence that she created this flag, her story has made her a national icon. Now think about it, folks. If you're not an American of a certain generation, What? I grew up knowing about Betsy Ross. Come on. Why? Because, hey, look, we need a girl character in this American Revolution history thing. Oh, and she's sewing. She's doing girl things. Right? What a perfect hero to trot out in time for the American bicentennial in 1976 was when we really got going with the Betsy Ross thing.
Right, showing that feminine domestic household duties are also a part of the collective American manifest destiny smorgasbord thing. That makes sense from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah.
I am not surprised to hear that it is a bit of a figment, though, because anytime, at this point, with what I know about American history and how it gets told, anytime one singular person is credited with a massive, important role in a classic story, it's red flags all over the play, like just right out of the gate. I'm like, is that true? So I am not shocked to hear in the first paragraph that this is a bit of a figment.
That it's kind of partly true. How about that?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. A seed of truth, but the story we all know and love is not accurate.
So let me just synopsize her early life here. She was born as Elizabeth, which Betsy is a short form of Elizabeth. Elizabeth Griscom on January 1, 1752, the 8th of 17 children, but only 9 survived childhood. Damn. Whew. Her father was a successful carpenter. When she was 3, they moved to Philadelphia, and they were Quakers. Upon finishing her schooling, Ross became an apprentice for a popular upholsterer. Ross learned how to make and repair many items, including curtains, tablecloths, bed covers, and rugs. She became a very skilled seamstress and upholsterer. Now, this is before sewing machines.
Right. There's cool gadgets and gizmos, but they are all clamps and springs. There's nothing mechanized about any of it.
No, and mostly, sewing is like learning how to lay things out. I mean, there's a lot to sewing other than poking holes. I mean, what am I sewing?
Right.
Sewing is often compared to carpentry.
Yeah. Measure twice, cut once, and all that jazz. Yeah.
Yeah. And turning 2-dimensional things into 3-dimensional shapes.
And taking into account the overlap necessary for structural integrity.
All that. What do you mean you didn't allow 1 3/4 there for the, well, crap, Quakers did not approve of their members marrying outside their faith. So Betsy and John eloped, blah, blah, blah. They started their own upholstery business in Philadelphia. Their business was successful, and it is reported they made bed hangings for George Washington in 1774. John Ross was also a member of the Pennsylvania militia. After 3 years of marriage, he passed away. People didn't last long then. No. At 24 years old, Betsy Ross was a widow. She continued to run the upholstery business and worked on uniforms, tents, and flags for the Continental Army. Right? We hadn't revolted from Britain yet. Shortly after her first husband's death, Ross claimed she was recruited for a very important job. According to a speech her grandson gave, George Washington and some other dudes visited Ross's upholstery shop in the summer of 1776. Washington and 2 other members of the Continental Congress brought a rough sketch of a flag with 13 red and white stripes and 13 6-pointed stars. Ross suggested the 6-pointed stars be changed to 5 because they were easier to make. She showed them how to make the new stars by folding a piece of paper, and with a single snip of the scissors made a perfect star. The men agreed to change the design.
Oh, wow.
Ross continued working as a seamstress and upholsterer for many years. She married her second husband, No historical records or documentation can be found to verify the claims. Apparently, she did make flags for the Navy. She made all kinds of flags and things, but as far as that first iconic flag, there is no hard evidence for that.
But it's easy to believe from the evidence that does exist, and that story at least implies that the reason we have a 5-pointed star is because she was like, no. Give me a piece of paper and some scissors. Let me show you how to do this. Which means that whether or not she sewed that actual flag,
she was involved with it.
She's very involved in the design of the flag as we know it. So it's a small stretch to the story that we all know casually.
Yeah. So it's like it's passed into American folklore. And I was 14 when...
But very believable.
I was 14 when the American bicentennial happened. 200 years. And there was just a whole, this is 1976. Things were still like, all the colors of history hadn't quite been told yet. And so there was all this big woo-ha about the Revolutionary War and Britain and the Redcoats and nothing about Native Americans or black people or anything other than...
But we're going to include white women. White women at least need to get a little representation.
Because they were focusing on 1776, not anything that happened after, right? So we don't have to have the Civil War or anything. I mean, they struck coins. All coins had bicentennial designs, and it was just a big deal. It was a big deal. This year is going to be the 250, and it's supposed to be a big deal. I'm going to be out of town.
Out of town.
I don't like explosions.
Yeah.
But Betsy Ross, I remember, I was 14. I was in 8th grade. We were in sewing home ec class, and our teacher brought up the most famous American seamstress, integral. So that's where I first really grokked the fact that a person sewed that. And
sure,
and she even said all the pictures, there weren't sewing machines in 1774. No. You know how big a flag is? You know how big the flag that flew over whatever the Star-Spangled Banner? There was a flag.
Right. Yeah. Flags that read that good at a distance are actually quite ginormous up close.
The only thing I can think of that's even close to big flags like that would be like sails.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine sail-making technology and tactics were necessary to deploy to make stuff like, tents and flags.
I mean, picture the Betsy Ross flag. The stripes were probably woven at width with selvages, right? We're not cutting things. We're stitching things that have been, I don't know. I need to know more about that. I have a flag, and now an American flag that is sewn, not printed. It's pretty cool. The one my mom got for her funeral, sewn and made in the USA. How would that be? American flag's not made in the USA. No!
Those exist, and it is very, very weird. It definitely, I don't recall exactly how I learned that story, but I do also recall having that be kind of, my first moment of like, oh yeah, someone had to sew that by hand because that was the only way sewing was done. I don't recall how I learned that, but I was around the same age. Like mentally, and just like that level of expanding into the world and being like, that I forget that that's a thing. And
I had done a lot of hand sewing myself. So the grok that, oh my God, she had to cut out those 13 little stars and place them exactly so, because they're in a circle on that flag, and the stripes and who wove the fabric? How many people helped her sew it? Did she sew it by herself?
Right, yeah. Doubt that that's one person's job. It makes sense that it would be a team effort.
Just like Viking women sewing sails back in the 1200s or whatever. So anyway, more American history in the strangest places.
Well, that's cool to note that she was a successful upholsterer and general part of the outfitting of the military, because I always just kind of was like, oh yeah, it's some random woman that sewed, and it's like, no, here's her complete story. She's like doing successful business things, and is just in that circuit of people wanting stuff. So of course she would have been the kind of person who they went to as they were designing a new flag. That makes perfect sense, right?
Exactly. She'd been doing that business for a long time. She was known. It's like, hey, we need a flag. Let's they could have went and asked a sailmaker or something. Probably there was, who's working with big textiles at this point.
Right. But, presumably George Washington liked her from prior dealings and was like, let's go to her because, she's got a good head on her shoulders for making bed curtains. So why not ask her about these stars or whatever?
And tents. My gosh.
Right.
We were sewing
totally.
tents.
If you like the products coming out of her shop, then maybe this new thing you're going to make. Like that totally, she doesn't just like pop out of nowhere, right? She has a complete story unto herself.
Yeah. more American history, a little bit pre-sewing machine here. I was looking for information on Indigenous Americans and sewing machines.
Huh.
And we're going to get to that. But I found this here page first, which kind of is a little bigger focus. This is called notesfromthefrontier.com, Frontier Quilts. This was posted in 2019, updated 2023. In frontier America, quilts were a way for women to gain immortality. Quilters often called their quilts diaries or albums because they told stories and were tangible evidence of how a woman had lived her life, cared for her family, built a home, and took pride in her work. Since women were often left out of written history, a quilt was a tangible legacy of her life that could remain on earth for generations after she passed. A quilt was her book, her needle was the pen. Quilts not only played a role in personal histories, but in national history as well. They documented the Civil War on both sides, struggles on the Trail West, settling frontier homesteads, as well as the abolition movement, suffragette movement, and prohibition. In 1800s America, women and girls of every age, class, racial, and ethnic background sewed. Sewing and quilting were synonymous with womanhood and central to the role as woman of the house. And because time was so precious and work never ended, even socializing among women often took place around quilting bees so women could sew and socialize at the same time. Woohoo, stitching, bitch. The first 1,000 miles of the main trail west were traveled by both California and Oregon-bound pioneers until they reached a point called Parting of the Ways, just past the Continental Divide. Right now, it's where Interstate 70 comes in. Then wagon trains split off going south to California or north to Oregon. Women had 1,000 miles to create friendship quilts for dear friends on the trail, since they would most likely never see them again. Such quilts often had visual motifs of the journey, such as winding way, wagon wheel, wandering foot, snail's trail, road to California, evening star. The pinwheel design reflected the power of the constant prairie wind that blew against the cloth-covered wagons. Wow, so a lot of those block patterns had actual meanings when you saw that in a thing.
Wow, they weren't just idle designs
No.
created by bored people. They were actual storytelling devices
Yeah.
for holding on to real emotional connections.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some quilts were more freeform and chronicled events they experienced on the trail, births, deaths, milestones along the way. Signatures were inked in with dates and sometimes embroidered over the ink. Willa Cather, the famous Pulitzer Prize-winning writer who captured so poignantly life on the frontier in O Pioneers and My Antonia, wrote of women quilters on the trail. She called quilts goodbye hugs in cloth and broken hallelujahs when they swaddled dead children and loved ones for burial on the trail. People live through such pain only once. Pain comes again, but finds a tougher surface. Quilts meander through her writings like stitchery. The oxen leaned into the yoke, pushing against the wood with their sinewy strength. Under the weight of the covered wagon, the iron-rimmed wheels grated against the gravel ruts. At the beginning of the Oregon Trail, the wooden wagon could take a load of 1.5 tons, a toolbox at one end, water bucket on the other, grease bucket in between. Lying on the bottom, heavier supplies like a plow, spinning wheel, stove, bags of seed, and chest of drawers. The top layer displayed the daily necessities: flour, salt, cooking pot, the Bible, a rifle, an axe, and a stack of hand-stitched, neatly tied quilts. One pioneer woman who settled in Texas in the 1830s recalled quilting bees where women would try to out-rival each other in the daintiness of their stitches, but also helped each other in every way. Once Native Americans were relegated to reservations and Native children were forced into institutional boarding schools, Native women began learning white sewing arts and quilting. But they integrated their own cultures into quilt making and introduced such motifs as morning star, Indian hatchet, flying geese, and other designs inspired by nature and animals.
Because you just can't stop people. Any creative outlet, they're going to find a way to still be themselves somehow.
Yeah. Since colonial times, women had created quilts for benevolent societies, the poor, church raffles, and social reform movements. As early as the 1830s, abolitionist quilters were making anti-slavery quilts and holding handcraft fairs to raise money for the cause. The first anti-slavery fair was held in Boston in 1834 and was so successful that the idea spread throughout New England and to the Midwest. Quilts and the Underground Railroad. We've heard about this.
Yeah.
The abolition movement brought quilting to a heightened art form, not only in the anti-slavery narratives that white quilt makers told in their stitches, but in those of black slaves and white abolitionists who sewed secret codes into their coverlets to navigate the Underground Railroad. Certain patterns like wagon wheel, tumbling blocks, and bear paw, it is believed, contain secret messages that conveyed to enslaved people means of escape, routes, and places of safety. Likewise, white quilt makers hung certain quilt designs to indicate messages to runaway slaves. A log cabin quilt hanging in a window with a black center for the chimney hole was said to indicate a safe house. A variation of Jacob's ladder gave cues as to the safe path to freedom. And then there's a link to a video where it actually shows some of the symbols and things.
Yeah, I've heard about this, and I believe I remember it as a bit in some movie or show or something that I was watching where, like, I don't remember the specifics, but I feel like in the scene they pull up to drop the person off at the next safe house, and then they go, oh, the house has been compromised because the quilt on the laundry line has been turned backwards so that you can't see the design. I'm pretty sure that that's what it was. Is they're like, oh no, that means that the house is compromised and like we can't drop you off here and we have to improvise something else. I'm pretty sure I don't remember like what that was in, but it really stuck in my mind. Like, oh yeah, laundry, quilts. These are a very easy, subtle way to send you can see that symbol at a distance, right? You don't have to go up to the house. You can be like pretty far away and see that signal is out.
And, probable deniability on the part of the person leaving the signal. It's just my laundry.
Exactly. So, this is fascinating.
Yeah, there was similar stuff done with textiles in World War II during the resistance by women because we can. Nobody notices us, right? We don't matter.
And again, you can't really stop people. If there's any amount of creativity whatsoever, people are going to find a way to do what they need to do.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The Civil War activated women to rally for their respective causes, making quilts for wounded soldiers in hospitals. In the North, the U.S. Sanitary Commission called for quilts for hospitals. Their efforts were so prodigious that more than 300,000 quilts were created. 1 out of 6 Union soldiers was kept warm by a hand-sewn quilt. And I've seen that in movies.
Wow.
I have seen that. There weren't, like, mass-produced wool army blankets then.
Right. Yeah, totally. So yeah, and anything to be remotely period correct is going to show that.
I have actually, now I'm going to have to go back and watch some of my movies that are set post-Civil War and recovering people. But, quilts are part of movies. Oh, quilts in movies. Okay, another rabbit hole. There's a lot of cool quilts featured in Dances with Wolves. Now I want to go back and look at.
Right. Well, because again, to be period correct, right? Back before sewing machines, in particular, sewing takes up so much time that a lot of very important conversations are going to happen in the context of sewing. It's just like in European fancy pants courts. They're embroidering giant tapestries during a huge amount of the important conversations that move the plot forward. If you want to be remotely period accurate, like the fact that hand sewing is a time-consuming hobby is unavoidable. It's going to be there in your sets.
Yeah. Now here's something. We're continuing on with this Notes from the Frontier thing. This is something I had not made the connections with the Civil War and Prohibition and suffrage. They're all connected.
Okay.
Yeah, and quilts are in here too. And sewing. Okay. After the Civil War, alcoholism and drug addiction to morphine were at epidemic levels among men, especially those who had been wounded in the war, which was a lot.
Sure.
Alcoholism was raging and ravaged families. Women especially felt the brunt of alcoholism, as often their only livelihood was dissipated in drink, and women were left to make ends meet. It became such a serious social problem that women in both the North and South joined in the temperance movement. And quilts were often a form of expression against the scourge and a way to raise money to fight it. The women's suffrage movement, which is getting the vote, also found its voice in quilts. An irony, too, since quilts had long symbolized domestic femininity, but now had taken on more rebellious symbols. The temperance movement and suffrage movements were so closely related in that so many women had found themselves being the sole breadwinners in their families because of male alcoholism and addiction. Yet females did not even have the right to vote, own property, or defend themselves against domestic abuse. Thus, the suffrage movement was fueled by the temperance movement, and many a woman turned to her sewing needle to survive and support the family.
Fascinating.
I can still make quilts to sell, right?
Right, yeah, it's something you can do that actually does make money to some extent, and also is a way for you to potentially express your rage in an appropriately feminine manner.
Exactly. Right under their nose.
Like, watch me stab this a million times while I think about your stupid face.
Yeah, man. We're going to Oregon in this narrative here, Notes from the Frontier. Such was the case of Oregon pioneer Abigail Duniway, who was forced to use her needle to support herself, her invalid husband, and her 6 young children. She started a millinery business, that's hat making, in Portland, Oregon, that through years of work became so successful she was able to sell it, then founded a pro-suffrage weekly newspaper called the New Northwest. Yeah!
Wow.
In 1869, the early days of her business, she started a quilt of beautiful reds, yellows, and oranges, and had pieced it all together, but she did not finish it until 30 years later. She wrote on a block of the finished quilt. This quilt was pieced in November 1869 by Abigail Scott Duniway of Oregon and was finished and quilted by her in November 1900 and donated to the first National Women's Suffrage Bazaar in honor of Theodore Roosevelt, the first champion of the equal suffrage movement ever elected to a national office. She had planned to donate the quilt to the New York World Fair in 1899, but the Portland Women's Club raised money to purchase it from her themselves. She donated the funds to the suffrage movement. The quilt now hangs in the Oregon Historical Society. Pretty cool. And then there's a whole bunch of pictures of what they're talking about here. So this is well worth a read. We've got the letter in here, all the pictures and stuff. So we got that in the show notes. There's even a Native American quilt made out of leather pieces. There's just all kinds of neat stuff here.
Ooh.
Trigger warning, there's a dead frontier baby wrapped in a quilt. What about the Indians? What about the Indians?
All right, that was all a side tangent.
That was all a side tangent.
The initial question of Native American sewing machine interactions.
Native American sewing machines, but quilting was okay. So, well, I'm not going to read on this one because I just read so many things that all said the same thing. I'm just going to synopsize some of the most successful things that the European fur traders brought to the natives was textiles. They didn't have any textiles on this continent except the Navajo, who were using churro sheep, but they got those from the Spanish. But anyway, there was no plant-based stuff in North America for people to make clothes out of. They either had to weave. I mean, there wasn't cotton, dang it. They had to weave reeds and...
Like cedar bark out here in the Pacific Northwest can be pretty fabric-y.
Sort of, right?
In some ways.
But, most people have this picture of Native Americans as wearing a lot of leather, which they did.
Weren't there dogs that they raised for fur that got made extinct by, the manifesting of destiny?
Yeah, up in Alaska, but those were their fur was saved for just the weaving of these really special blankets. There wasn't enough of them to make like fabric.
Sure, gotcha.
So like when Hudson Bay Company, and we talk about Canadian First Nations, I know a little more about that in this respect. When they started bringing fabric, specifically calicos, which remember is printed fabric from India.
From Calcutta.
From Calcutta. Printed in North America, calico referred to any printed fabric.
Right.
But it was from Calcutta, even if it was from England.
Right. Calico, Calcutta, like that whole thing.
And the other main thing that they brought that was just worth so much was wool blankets.
Cotton and wool. Woven cotton and wool.
Cotton and wool. Think of how warm and waterproof and lightweight a wool blanket is compared to a buffalo robe. Just the weight difference alone.
Yeah. To say nothing of being way more wash and wear.
So wool blankets were like, I mean, you could trade a lot of furs. You know, for those of you who don't know American history, there was a time when the European demand for animal furs meant a lot of weird old guys went off into the woods of North America to kill all the animals and send their furs back to England. And Native Americans were kind of in between all that. But it's called the fur trade time. It's talking about 1820 to about 1850, I think. And this is when natives got introduced to a lot of European things. Okay, sewing needles, metal sewing needles were priceless, and thimbles and awls, anything made out of metal. But fabric was so special. When did sewing machines come? Well, they didn't come. The sewing machines came after the people were rounded up and put on reservations.
It's part of the we'll teach you skills to assimilate into our society thing.
Trigger warning, Indian boarding schools. So in Canada and in the United States, it was considered is what you did. You took kids away from their family and sent them away to boarding school. No permission. No, we're doing this. We're taking your kids. And the whole idea was to strip them of their culture and, quote, civilize them and teach them how to not be Indians. So they would be terribly punished for speaking their own languages or anything having to do with their own culture. When they got there, their hair was cut, their clothes were burned, and they were put in Western, quote, white man clothes. And you can't have any contact with your family. And you're in a dormitory with kids of all nations, right? So even if you do speak the same language, but here you are, all these traumatized kids. And what are we going to do? We're going to teach you how to be white men. We're going to teach you how to be productive. And for you girls, that means sewing.
Right.
And this is the introduction to the sewing machine for a lot of these girls. And I have looked at so many pictures. Anytime you look at residential school girls, and you'll see sewing machines and ironing boards and sewing machines and sewing machines. And I've tried to identify the sewing machines, and I'm still trying, but I think the ones I've mostly seen are nationals. They have the old school. They're not singers, but I need to know more about this. So they taught the girls how to run sewing machines and make Western-style clothing. And the idea being they're going to teach girls all the domestic arts, and then during the summer, when there's no school, they farm them out to local families to work.
Sure. I was wondering, where does the labor exploitation come into the picture? That's where.
Now, I believe the same thing happened in Australia with the stolen generations from 1910 to 1970.
Sure. Same exact bullshit. Steal the children, do a cultural genocide, get free slave labor at the same time.
And the boys, in both instances, boys were taught farming and metalwork and wagon building, carpentry, things, they were trying to make working class, quote, Americans out of these people.
Or Canadians or Australians. But they're also willing to be second-class citizens who know their place and are willing to be exploited. Like, all of that at once. And that's how the sewing machine enters. Yeah. The sewing machine's a tool. It can be used all kinds of ways.
It can be used all kinds of ways. So, of course, these machines are going to make their way back to the res. That's what I'm saying.
Naturally.
Of course. How are you going to keep them down on the farm when they've seen Paris,
Yeah, sewing machines are like water. They're going to get everywhere. They will find a way.
A useful tool like that. Plus, if you're trying to teach these people, okay, now she's 18, she's home from school. I want a sewing machine because now I'm going to sew for the whole, So it quickly becomes a tool for personal advancement. This is backwards from the white people's, like, we get a sewing machine and then we become exploited by it. The whole, like, were you introduced to factory sewing first or home sewing first?
It's reminding me of what you were telling me many months ago about how the sewing machine propagated through colonial Africa.
Yeah, it very much the same.
How it very quickly became a tool that the colonized people were like, yeah, well, we'll keep this. This is working for us. We're actually going to use this to increase our wealth and increase our status and increase our material reality in the world, despite the fact that it came from you, people who are ruining everything in every other respect. Somehow the sewing machine manages to, even when it comes in on bad footing, it manages to turn into something useful fairly quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Which is now a lot of clothing, for instance, the Navajo, the Diné people, what's considered their, quote, traditional clothing is actually velvet skirts and silk blouses, machine sewn.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what we picture.
Because tradition is a living, breathing thing, and that's what they're using. So there it is.
Yeah. And they were doing that. And, once sheep and stuff. So I want to read a thing about the blankets here. This is pretty cool. So basically, once you've got the sewing machine, you bring it home. Now you can crank out all kinds of good stuff.
And do the storytelling through blankets and all of those things that people have done since the dawn of quilting.
And that whole hybridization of, I've learned these European sewing skills and I'm going to apply my own culture, my own clothing shapes and decoration styles. And you get a lot of young indigenous people today doing great fusion fashion with what they've got. And myself have zero native in me, but I have lived close with many Western tribes, and some of my first sewing jobs were regalia because not everybody could sew, right? So it's like, hey, can you do this for me? So I did some sewing like that for fur trade and regalia stuff. There's traditional dances where you want things to look traditional, and then you go to modern powwow, you've been to powwow. The colors, the materials, there's no like, oh, you have to look like Indians in 1888. Culture evolves.
Yeah. I got to go to my first powwow last summer. You took me. And it's definitely, there were some people who had clearly made an effort to stick with pre-modern materials and methods, or still had old stuff that they were preserving and carrying on. And then, there were the people who were decked out head to toe in neon nylon and, well, not head to toe, but like color-wise, the visual impression was head to toe.
Yeah, there's no limitation.
And all kinds of weird, fuzzy things. And it was very interesting to see the complete spread, right? From the old-timey stuff through the like extremely, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like we're doing what we want to do. But it's all traditional. It's all traditional because that's what powwow is.
It all comes from it, right? And when they do have different categories for traditional dress and modern dress and this and that. But I was looking at some regalia at so that's powwow this year, and I was seeing duct tape and zip ties and all kinds of stuff. Places where you can't see it unless you're really up close, But I was doing traditional stuff because I didn't have a sewing machine yet, for one thing, and so I'm punching with an awl and stitching with sinew and all. I did use Elmer's glue though. Ooh, modern. But I've worked on several machines on reservations in Washington, and they're usually old and well used. Still a lot of treadles. In fact, most of Navajo Nation doesn't have electricity at all. So you'll see a lot of treadle machines down there, and pretty much always singers because easy to get parts, even now. You're sewing on a 66 from 1899. Yeah, man, we got that.
Made in the millions. Yeah, even if you wear the machines out, even if you wear the parts out, there's another replacement part to just drop in. No big deal. And treadle is barely any less work than electric when you really get down to it.
Two of the best seamstresses I know are two Siletz women that I know, and they are masters of the modern machine, the serger, the glue gun. We're not being held back by some kind of idea about what's, right or not. Culture is evolving. We're going to use the tools we got. And I think when Native girls were forced to use sewing machines, well, just take it home and then let's use it. Let's use this thing.
Yeah.
Let's make it, do all this stuff. So total apologies and horribleness. We're talking about American history here. And what I like to tell people about, right now it's kind of maybe a rough time to be an American. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. America is an idea and a promise, and we haven't been great yet, but we're still advancing the project. Okay? We didn't fail. We're still working through stuff, okay?
Just haven't succeeded yet.
We just haven't succeeded yet. And as soon as we have liberty and justice for all, for real, yeah, then we'll be threaded. Thank you, Betsy Ross.
And there you have it, another series of loosely organized tangents around United States history, which strayed across the first U.S. Revolutionary flag, frontier quilting, quilts as covert communication devices and activist symbols, and how the sewing machine was forced into indigenous hands, and they made it their own anyway. I enjoyed getting more details about the Betsy Ross story, holes and all. It's nice to have one of those vague images in my sense of U.S. history get fleshed out and be able to actually fit it into my overall sense of that period of history. Not that I learned anything mind-blowing by any means, but it's still nice to have this woman go from a dreamy propaganda painting to a real person with a business and trade relationships that explain why she was the subject of said painting. I feel like I learned a lot about quilting as a social movement tool in this episode. I still have only dabbled with piecing and clearly haven't done nearly enough studying of the history of quilting and social movements. But of course, such an old and easily personalized means of keeping warm would have layers of meaning. Always another layer to discover. If you have book, movie, podcast, or other recommendations for us to learn more about this social aspect of quilting, I really want to hear it. As a reminder, we are unofficially sponsored by Stagecoach Road Vintage Sewing Machine. You can reach them at srvsew@gmail.com. Follow us on social media and YouTube, and you can best support us by sharing the podcast with your friends. You can even get ad-free episodes by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/used2sew. Thank you for listening to us here at Used to Sew. We always welcome your additions, corrections, and feedback in general. Please reach out to us via email at usedtosew@gmail.com. Used to Sew is a production of Fox and Raven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Raven Media, visit our website at foxandravenmedia.com.